Hi, my name is Eric Orner, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2021 Brooklyn Book Festival for a conversation with the singular Alison Bechdel. Before we begin, I want to let you know that the book we'll be discussing in this program, Alison's The Secret to Superhuman Strength, can be purchased in the link below. I've been a cartoonist, comics creator, and animation storyboard artist for a lot of years. I know a ton of exceptionally talented people creating great work. But here's the thing, Alison Bechdel is in a class by herself. I think she's the greatest cartoonist of our times. And really, when I think about it, and I thought about it a lot over the last couple of weeks, maybe she's the greatest cartoonist of all time, which I know she'll be embarrassed by, but it's the truth. To me, what Michael Jordan is to basketball, what Mary Tyler Moore is to sitcoms, or Alice Munro is to the short story, that's what Alison is to cartooning. Her cult following for her comic strip, The Dykes to Watch Out For, expanded wildly for her best-selling memoirs, Fun Home, adapted into a Tony Award-winning musical, and Are You My Mother? Her many honors include being named a MacArthur Fellow and the Cartoonist Laureate of Vermont. And I couldn't be more honored and delighted to join you all here today to talk with her about her life, her work, and specifically her fantastic new book, New York Times bestseller, The Secret to Superhuman Strength. So let's get right down to taking a look at some of the book. Alison, I think you have, Alison, hello. Sorry.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for that extraordinarily generous and overblown introduction. That's very kind of you. I just want to say I'm very happy to be here at the Brooklyn Book Fest, but I'm even happier to have a chance to talk with Eric. We're old friends, but I haven't seen you in years, Eric. So this is great. And it's so weird. I swear your middle name is Dorian Gray. What is going on with you? You look younger every time I see you.
Just the lighting in here. I got to anyway, thank you. Not great, but anyway, proceed.
Okay. So I'm going to start just with a little slide presentation with some images from the book and talk about the book, and then we'll come back and talk together. So I'm going to share my screen. So the title of this book, The Secret to Superhuman Strength, comes from my childhood fascination with the bodybuilding ads in the back of all my comic books. You know those Charles Atlas ads, like where he's in his leopard print Speedos and the guys are kicking sand on each other at the beach. After years of reading those things, I finally got up the nerve to respond to this ad, which offered the secret to superhuman strength. I sent away my $1 for it. I got this really disappointing booklet that explained like some kind of bizarre martial art that was way too technical for a little kid to understand. So that's where the title comes from. The book is about my relationship to exercise. Over the course of my life, I've pursued all different kinds of exercise, from downhill skiing as a kid, calisthenics, took up jogging, did martial arts, yoga. When I moved to Vermont in my 30s, I got more into these outdoor activities, biking, well, indoor biking too, and indoor weightlifting, but backcountry skiing. I just always have had some kind of thing that I do for exercise and release. Sorry, I'm a little disorganized. It's so funny. I've done so many of these Zoom talks, but it's different from doing an in-person talk, and I can't retain any memory of how I did it from iteration to iteration. It's like I'm just doing it for the first time. Anyhow, the thing about exercise for me that is so compelling is that feeling that you get when you're working out very intensely, or like that feeling of runner's high, or you know, intensified focus, where you sort of get outside of yourself.
Right.
That's a feeling that I really love and that I'm always trying to recapture in some way. And exercise is usually a pretty reliable route to it. Also, so is creativity. So is, you know, when I'm drawing on a deadline, I can get that same kind of focus. Eric, that's funny. You said that thing about Mary Tyler Moore. Look, there she is in the background.
Yeah, I was so pleased.
Yeah, of all those accolades, the Mary Tyler Moore one is the one I would accept.
I'm glad you deserve it. So
I've always been interested too in the creative process and how that experience of flow happens creatively too. And so in this, it always came much more easily to me as a child. As a kid, I would just draw effortlessly and happily for hours. And now that it's my job, it's a much more fraught process. So one of the things I explored in this book, which is about exercise, is other authors, other writers' relationship to their creativity. I look at a couple different writers. This group here is the British Romantics, Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William and Dorothy Wordsworth. These guys all wrote about creativity. They had a similar connection to their creativity and their experiences outside in nature. These guys were always walking everywhere. The landscape very much informed the things they wrote about. And the British Romantics were big influences on the American Transcendentalists. I also write in my book about Margaret Fuller on the left and Ralph Waldo Emerson on the right there. And these two people had their own sort of mystical experiences of getting outside of themselves. And Emerson talked about it as becoming a transparent eyeball. A friend of his drew this cartoon at the time, which is really kind of silly and doesn't really capture what he's talking about. He was talking about losing himself, which was just really a compelling idea to me. Margaret Fuller, too, in her early 20s, had an experience one day of realizing that her self wasn't real. And it was a very pivotal, powerful realization for her. I also write about Jack Kerouac. I know, I'm like a middle-aged feminist. Why am I writing about Jack Kerouac? But I've always really loved his book, The Dharma Bums, where he climbs a mountain in the Sierras with the poet Gary Snyder, with whom it's pretty clear to me he's somewhat in love. So that was an experience that I wanted to write about, and I actually ended up reenacting. I actually went to this mountain and hiked up it with my partner. But Kerouac and Snyder also were very into Buddhism at this time and talked a lot about their Buddhist beliefs as they were climbing this mountain, which really fascinated me. I've had my own attempts to meditate and study Buddhism, which have not gone very well. And I did once have a mystical experience of my own when I was 21 and tripping on psilocybin mushrooms in Central Park. I had this amazing realization that my self didn't really exist, that it was just like this false shell that kept me separate from everything else in the world. And that was such a great feeling. I've just always been trying to get it back in one way or another by meditating, through my artwork, through mostly through exercise, which is what my book is about. So I think that's, oh yeah, here I am exercising, running, looking at the waterfall, sticking my head under the waterfall. This is a waterfall in Yosemite.
nice.
And that's the end. Okay, so now we can talk.
Great. Well, I now that you've done that wonderful presentation of these images, I have to scramble my questions, because I want to start out with one that's just about craft, because it's an obvious one. This is the first book that I'm aware of that I can remember of yours, although there might have been some Dykes books that with such a sort of an extraordinary use of color. Am I right about that?
Yeah, no, I've never done color before. I would do color illustrations for the covers of my book, but never a whole piece, no.
Right. And the color's gorgeous, and it's striking because I've always hugely admired your use of limited color. And then this, I opened this up and I was like, oh my gosh. And then when I realized it's also interesting because it's a book about self as opposed to a book about relationships. I don't know, I don't know whether that's a fair thing to say, but that's what was going through my head. And yet, am I right in saying that Holly, your wife, like did this color?
Yes, she did.
So which to me is like Alison's writing a book about self, and yet because I don't let my partner even look over my shoulder. I get too clenched up. I feel like there's criticism behind me, and I feel like I'll never finish the drawing. So the idea that you were brave enough to to me, that's like the bravest thing I can imagine, letting your wife, do this beautiful work with you.
Well, yeah, it's funny that we were enacting a theme of the book. I mean, part of what the book is about is just my own difficulty with intimacy. It's like always a struggle for me to just be in a relationship with someone else and not just consumed by my own craziness.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. So totally, to me, having sex is one thing, but having my boyfriend work on my drawings, way more intimate as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah,
it's like you blew through all the intimacy stop signs to have Holly color your book. I was like,
I know. Part of what I have always loved about cartooning is that you can do it all yourself. You don't have to collaborate with people. So this was the first time I have really, to any degree, collaborated with another person. And it was kind of tough. We had our moments as we, got this workflow set up. I wanted her to do it exactly the way I wanted her to do it. But of course, she needed to have some latitude. And eventually I was able to let go and sort of let her make more of the aesthetic decisions instead of trying to micromanage, because the real truth is I just didn't have time. That's why I enlisted her to do this. I don't know how anyone writes and draws their own comic and then does it in full color. That just seems, I know Chris Ware does that, but I think he's made of kryptonite or something.
Yeah.
So I just needed help, and I was very fortunate that she.
There's parts of it. Now I'm thinking of stuff I want to ask you in our lightning round of things I like. So I'm going to hold, but there is one. There's like a just sublime, like you're outside in Vermont, and it's maybe dusk, and there's the mountain ridge has a thin violet stroke. It's just a super little stroke, but it is really beautiful. So anyway,
Eric, I want to tell you something funny about the color, though, because you mentioned how I have worked with very constrained color things in my other books. In fact, Holly did not use color to do that work. She did it all with gray ink wash, and did color separations. Like she did for each page, there's a cyan, a magenta, and a yellow layer that she.
Well, that's even I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that's wild.
It's insane, actually.
Right.
But it was a way that kept the color very pure, and you know, it didn't get muddied because we were only
Right.
dealing with the printer colors.
Right. That's fascinating, and I would never have guessed that. So let me switch and ask you something else. Is that okay? Oh,
yes, totally. Because that is like a really boring topic for anyone who's not.
I know. I apologize. It's just that you showed the images, so I had to. So, I think my reading of it was that there's a lot of focus in the book on the hard to get your head around connection between mind and body, their interconnectedness, and you intertwine like philosophical questions like personal autonomy with very nuts and bolts things like the feel of a ski boot, and that made me think of these memoirs that I've started to, not just memoirs, but Keith Richards' book about well, it's his memoir, but a lot of it's just about chords on his guitar, which I wouldn't have thought would interest me, but in his telling, it did. And or William Finnegan's book about surfing, because obviously they're not really about just chords or surfing. They're about how a person lives inside themselves. And so I guess my question was it scary to write a book that gave like equal emphasis to doing as opposed to thinking? Does that make sense?
Was that scary?
Or at least different. I mean, you make all these things very interesting and captivating to me. From yoga to jiu-jitsu to alpine skiing.
One thing that's really interesting to me about cartooning is that it is a very embodied way of writing. It's very different from just typing words on a keyboard. You really are using your body to make an image. Like you're holding a pen, you're transmitting like energy from your arm into your hand into the paper. And I don't know, I feel like I also have a great tendency to get stuck in my head, which I feel sort of saved by, like cartooning has kind of saved me. Like, cause I can think all I want, but eventually I'm going to have to like sit down with a pen and a piece of paper and like make this thing become actual.
Right.
So that's just a really good thing. Otherwise I'd never probably write anything.
So I guess it was a revelation to me that left to my own devices, like I think I get that intoxicating sort of runner's high that you talked about only from sketching something that isn't due, like not a work drawing or a cartoon. I wander around my sketch pad. I exercise because you should, but I don't. You conveyed how important it is to you. How like mentally, and I thought that was fascinating. I didn't know that.
But I know it's my secret.
Yeah, well,
not anymore.
No more. So let me switch just sort of narrative. You mentioned in your opener, the book highlights a number of famous thinkers, the Romantics, Transcendentalists, the Buddha, Kerouac. But I like the stuff that in particular, maybe because I've spent a lot of time in New England, like the stuff about Emerson and the famous author and lecturer Margaret Fuller, I thought that was, I loved reading about that. So can
Oh,
you tell
good.
me a little bit about the strength you found from their example?
Yeah, I just love those guys, the
Yeah,
Transcendentalists. I just love their name.
yeah,
And I've always been curious. I never learned about them in school. Um, and I've always sort of casually tried to learn more about them, but I never really did it until I started working on this book. And
oh,
I I still don't know what transcendentalism is about, even after reading a lot about Margaret and and Waldo and their their gang. But I feel this profound connection with them. They are these proto hippies. They were doing
right.
all this crazy progressive stuff. 130 years ago. No,
Yeah,
100 years ago. I can't. 200 years ago. I can't do math anymore. Um, you know, they were vegans.
right, right.
They sent their kids to progressive schools. They had these very progressive race and gender politics, like everything that hippies did and that the counterculture still is into. These people were doing a long time ago, and I just found that really cool, especially Margaret Fuller as a woman in the deep, dark bowels of the 19th century, living this pretty autonomous life as a journalist.
Yeah.
She's such a fascinating character.
Well, I loved reading about her, and I mean, like I say, as a on again, off again New Englander, like you sort of take a sort of a chauvinistic pride in the fact that the Transcendentalists, the abolitionists, John Adams, who to the rest of the rest of them couldn't stand, but thought he was right half the time. Like, take some pride in the fact that those slightly annoying New Englanders sort of stuck to their guns and found a way of living that that was their own. And I didn't know much about Margaret Fuller. I knew the name, so reading the book, it was a delight to read about her.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel this sort of regional pride about them too, even though, of course, anyone looking closely at them finds all the ways that they were racist and sexist, but of course they were, but still they were super progressive thinkers. And
and iconoclasts, like I no
yeah,
question, like they nobody's perfect, and I know they weren't. What appeals to me about them is that if the rest of the world was going to the left, they were they were marching off to the right. And trying to live one's life as a cartoonist, I think, is an exercise in that anyway. So it's
yes.
got some appeal. Well, sort of along the same lines, like in terms of inspirations and things that you wanted to that you touched on in this book. Like early on, you have the you character has a burst of generosity, and you decide you've assigned yourself a bunch of imaginary wishes, and after a period of using them all up, at least in your head, you feel a little greedy, and you decide, well, maybe I ought to apportion some of these imaginary wishes to others. And you sort of touch on the idea that that's a sort of a maybe a Buddhist concept. And I wanted to have I wanted you to talk a little bit about your interest in Buddhism and how it figures in, I don't know, your own quest for superhuman strength.
I hope I can say something at least quasi coherent about this, because I am very interested in Buddhism and have studied it, but the thing that is so compelling to me about it is something that's very difficult to put into words, because these ideas just defy language. You know, that experience I had in the park, I was surprised to learn I couldn't describe to anyone in words. I made an effort. I got close to something, but I knew it didn't convey the essence of this experience, which was an experience of not having a self, of being outside of that realm where there is a self and an other, a subject and an object.
Right.
And Buddhism has a really wonderful way of thinking about that aspect of reality that I'm not really able to describe. I was kind of hoping, like, by writing this book about it with lots of images and scenes, that maybe some of that feeling would come through, but I find it really hard to explain in words. But
well, I mean, it's not an easy question to ask about, tell me about Buddhism and how it informs. But I did, as long as you're talking about it, there's at the end of the book, which I loved, it ended on a perfect note, which is so hard to do. You and Holly, I think, are climbing a high peak in the Sierra Nevadas, right?
That's not the very end, but yeah, we do that. We go and climb the same mountain that Jack Kerouac climbed in the Dharma Bums. Yeah.
And you're talking about, I wish I could find it. You're talking about something that the Buddha says. Sorry, I have to put on my glasses. Bear with me. Everything should be seen as imageless, right? Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, again, like sort of mind-blowing brave, because you're a graphic memoirist. So,
oh man, I didn't even think of that.
No, it's like, oh man, like, and the sumptuousness of this book, just in terms of, I mean, again, I don't, just to touch on craft for a minute, like your drawing is both beautiful and enormous fun. I've told this to you recently. It reminds me of each page is filled with gifts that you open up. Like it reminds me of Hilary Knight's drawings. Those wonderful Eloise drawings.
I love that you cited Hilary Knight. He's one of my favorite illustrators of all time.
I mean,
but Eric, back at you. Your drawing is so rewarding to look at minutely. So many people just make a drawing that you can gloss over, but yours also demand very close reading, which I've always loved about your work.
I appreciate that. But the thing that I don't get, and that I think I try, but your compositions are great. There's movement. It takes you, it doesn't take, it's like opening presents. It doesn't take great energy. Your eye goes from one gift to the next. And then you pull back and you enjoy the whole. And that does remind me of for some reason, my folks, when I was growing up, had all the Eloise books, and the weirdest one, and the one that doesn't get mentioned these days very often, there was Eloise in Moscow.
Yeah.
Which was just
the Soviet Eloise.
Yeah. And it was, every tiny corner had this subversive bomb in it that made you laugh out loud. And I get that feeling all the time in reading your stuff. And so I'm looking at this beautiful 2-page spread of the Matterhorn, or is that what Jack Kerouac called it?
It's not the Matterhorn, but it was called
good.
Matterhorn.
Right, because I started.
Hang on.
Okay.
I'm grabbing my book.
Good.
I just wanted to talk for a second about, I mean, you mentioned that spread, and I did something in this book, which I have not typically done. I've never been a cartoonist who did a lot with the page design or the page spread. Like I would just be lucky enough to to get a page drawn. But in this book, I have a lot of scenes that like spill off the page. They bleed off the page, and they sometimes it's a spread. In this case, it's just half of the spread. This page bleeds off, and that was that was surprisingly difficult to do. Design wise, it just took a lot of thinking and planning and measuring.
I'm so glad you say that, because when I try it, it is hard. It's, you're used to, and especially, we've lived our lives in these constricted panels, and all of a sudden.
Yes. We both come out of that newspaper world where we had to fit in that space.
Right.
And when I started working in books, that constraint was gone, and I started learning very slowly about how to play with the space of the book.
Right. Well, and I can't tell you how many times in my note-filled copies of all your stuff, I note that, because anyway, you're right. Like, I don't mean to be talking too crafty, because we don't want to lose the audience, but kudos to you on those double trucks, because they're impressive.
Well, one more thing I'll say about that I don't think it's too geeky, is that it was a way also to accentuate the storytelling. Those moments where the story bleeds off the page are pivotal moments. Like they're things where something's happening related to the theme of the book. So it was fun to figure out how to do that.
Definitely. Well, let me here's a different question, like about I guess again about themes, and I've been calling it to myself the self question. I know, I've read many times that you've called Are You My Mother a book about relationships, and eventually, obviously, a book about your mother. And then obviously Fun Home centered on your relationship with your father. So was it freeing or the opposite to be writing a memoir where self rather than your relationship with somebody else was the focus?
Yes, because what I was writing about, what I wrote about in this book, in The Secret to Superhuman Strength, for me is not, it's all about the self, but it's about becoming free of the self. Right. I've always experienced myself as this sort of painful, obstructing force. And I think that has a lot to do with my parents. My parents inhibited me in various ways. I had to write my way out of those inhibitions, writing a whole book about each of my parents to kind of get out from under their respective thumbs. And so once that happened, what was next? Then next is how to get out from under my own thumb, which I think is what this book is about.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I guess let's go to what I call the lightning round of things I liked. because I
okay.
I tried to, as I told you before this started, I tried to divide my questions into craft, narrative, and philosophy, and now I realize that they're all hopelessly muddled, and so the hell with that. But I so now I just like to something more fun, lightning round of things I loved, and I wondered whether you'd had anything to say about them.
Okay, I'll just say the first thing that comes to my head.
Yeah. But you don't have to. I mean, it doesn't have to be lightning in the fact that we can talk about one thing for 20 minutes if you want. But
Okay.
but yeah, the first thing. So one sentence. Because I'm a cartoonist and I sort of caress your drawings. I don't want it for a moment take away from how much I love to read you. And there are things that you say, and this is one of them. On page 24 of the new book, you say, it's hard to convey in those lax and decadent times how rigidly policed this sort of thing used to be. And it was a question of, whether you were allowed to get, I can't remember, PF flyers or Keds rather than, the girl sneakers. And
Yeah.
I loved that sentence. And
do you recall that strict sneaker gender divide from our youth?
I mean, as you know, unfortunately, I just had a big high school reunion, and
God,
I was at home. I mean, it was while the parents were doing the things they do in that movie, The Glass House, or, while they were having swingles parties and whatever they were doing. Yes, God forbid, boys could wear bone-colored cords or Levi's. I mean, they could wear other kinds of jeans, but if they weren't Levi's, you would get drummed out of every child society. The parents wouldn't know, absolutely, the sort of, and pathetically, I still wear the same sneakers. They were Converse.
Really? Wow.
I mean, you can live as iconoclastic a life as you want, and then, I still find myself, and I think that's a part of the era too. Like we were, I'm from the 70s where boys wore jeans, and I've never been comfortable. I feel like I look fancy pants wearing anything else. But anyway, so yes, I do remember.
Anyhow, yeah, we do seem to be living in much more lax and decadent times now. People wear whatever the hell they want. It's astonishing.
Right. It is astonishing.
My nephew wears a skirt to school and no one gives him any trouble.
Well, and the thing is, it doesn't necessarily mean that inwardly they're particular. I mean, maybe it means that they march to their own drummer, but I just think there's less, like you say, less policing. I don't think it means that they're, anyway, well, it's interesting. Let me move to another one.
Okay, we're not moving at a lightning pace. Let's pick it up.
I'm sorry, and I'm talking too much. So, here's something that I've always thought you are just a genius at, and I can remember circling it several years ago in Are You My Mother? Sound effects. You were able to spell out sound effects. It's like a small genius. And the thing in Are You My Mother was flicka-ticka when you typing on
I was typing.
But also there's a ski falling off in the new one, and the word schunt. Anyway, I wonder, does that just roll off your tongue, or do you work at it?
No, I work at it, and it's something I loved about Don Martin's cartoons in Mad as a kid. He was the master of sound effects, often very descriptive sound effects, and sometimes they were just ridiculous, over the top. But I think I took schunt directly from Don Martin.
Interesting.
And I also love what Chris Ware does with sound effects. I've ripped him off too. There's a scene where I show myself running from a distance, and there's a little, I can't make the sound, but I spell it SCHX, for the sound of my shoes on the gravel. That's a kind of thing that he has pioneered, these tiny little descriptive sound effects that fit right into the drawing.
Well, every time I read them, I sort of hit myself upside the head because I've never been, I don't give it much attention, and they are like so descriptive. They take you there as well as any drawing. And
they
so,
really can add a dimension to
absolutely.
comics where you can't make sounds or movement. It's so sad.
Yeah, absolutely. So bear with me. Well, here's just one thing. I think I mentioned it earlier that I absolutely loved. It's on page 65, and it's sort of the beginning of your sort of exercise intoxication. It's like you're discovering this about yourself. And it's the 13 or 12-year-old you, and you sort of bound from the dinner table to exclaim, I have to do my leaps, which just had me laughing out loud. It was so adorable, first of all. And
yeah, that made my mother so mad. I don't know why I stayed in the kitchen to do these things, but I didn't want to leave everyone, I guess. But I'm sure it was very annoying.
Well, it was great. So here on page 93, there's a.
I feel like we're having an exam. Like,
I'm sorry. I'm just saying. I don't have to. I don't have to say that part. I'll just say there is a page where you do this completely delightful full-page rendering of the Michigan Women's Festival.
Oh,
which is just like a joy to behold and great fun to read. But at the same point, as like a gay guy of similar, we're very close in age. Like it made me think, like, it's sort of like as much fun as the drawing was and the narrative. Like, it was also like a pretty significant sociological point to me that because you say the scene, the festival was entirely without body objectification, and I was contrasting it. Unfortunately, I was contrasting it with, meanwhile on my side of the aisle, with, I mean, at big gay male gatherings, the idea, sometimes it felt like objectification, unfortunately, was all we did. Not that I'm proud of that. And I was never proud of that. Part of it was, but it's just so different.
Well, there were pockets of gay men doing something different, like the radical fairies.
Sure.
I'm sure they were more body positive, but yeah, no, that was a really striking thing for me about discovering that lesbian feminist universe. I feel like that kind of saved me so much grief that I just have seen so many women go through with, just wasting ridiculous amounts of energy on their appearance and their bodies. And that got disrupted in my cohort in a wonderful way. Did not have to lose much energy over it.
Well, it did. And there's another, I can't remember, maybe around page 100, you do talk about what happened to gay men and their body image at the advent of HIV, where, not only was there like the normal amount of self-loathing that came from not being a straight guy but then the idea that our bodies were dying out from under us, and sort of insane gym culture that resulted from it. Anyway, it just sounded.
Wait, I'm interested in hearing your reaction to that, because that resonated for me, but I learned about it from Michelangelo Signorile. Wrote in one of his books, wrote something about gym culture and traced it back to that, men are dying, young fit men are dying, and the reaction is to get as big and strong as you can. But there really was a shift in male body image for everyone. And I think that's where it started.
I think you're right. I mean, I know for myself, it was, I mean, it's not complicated. I didn't want my folks, I had just come out. And then it's like, looked over my shoulder and there was like the mushroom cloud of AIDS.
Yeah.
And I didn't want my parents to think I was sick. Like that was where my
Wow.
head was at.
Wow.
So I started to go to the gym. And then, that feeds itself. Your friends just became the aesthetic that you had to keep up with in the least body positive sort of way, because
Right.
we were looking at Marky Mark on billboards, and thinking like,
Yep.
it's supposed to be like this. It was, you hear about like, you read about, I don't know, like what the women in the Mad Men era, were going through, and it's so similar. Like,
Yeah.
the perfect physique, anyway.
I feel like another part of that is just capitalism at work, and capitalism found a way to make men insecure about their bodies the way women were insecure, because then you can sell them more shit.
Totally. I completely agree. So here's a different thing. One thing that I loved about the book, which was just sort of subversive fun, was sort of, there's a strand of like unabashed consumerism, like the coveting,
Yes.
coveting of
Speaking
stuff.
of capitalism.
Right. And I mean, I've known you a long time. I never thought about you like, I mean, I think about you, but I don't think about, I certainly never thought about like the 14-year-old, with the writing away to LL Bean, or coveting Patagonia fleeces, or
I think I really had a Patagonia fetish in my 30s. Like that's where I spent my money. I know
you make the point in the book. It became, when we were in our 30s, Patagonia suddenly was, I remember they opened a store on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I happened to be visiting, and it was cool. So
it's very seductive. I mean, it's beautiful stuff. It's also very functional.
right.
And I don't know, of all these companies, Patagonia has been pretty great about environmental stuff. I mean, they really try to encourage you not to buy their stuff. I admire
didn't know that. That's interesting. I didn't know.
Well, I don't know, it's a little disingenuous, because of course they're also showing you all this great stuff, but also telling you this stuff takes resources to make.
Right.
Don't buy it if you don't need it. I admire that.
And they're not doing it like in sweatshops and
Right.
Sri Lanka or,
right, which is part of why it's so expensive, because they're not exploiting people.
right. So here's another sort of craft question. At some point you mentioned creating huge life-size drawings with brushes, and
Yeah.
and I wondered, like, because some of there's places, including the cover, where you adopt like just a looser. They're looser images. They're still they're wonderfully expressive, and there's nothing loose about the expressions of the people. Like you can read it just as well as you always can read your work. But there's a sort of almost an ink wash sort of calligraphy sort of.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff that you're talking about was actually done with a brush. It was done in a totally different way than the regular cartoon drawings, which I do with many, many layers of sketches and reference drawings, and then a pencil, and then inking with a nib. I've always, over the years, I've gotten, that's how I work. It's how I have to work to get the effect I want, but it's also very, I don't know, it's not, I don't know, I love it. It's fun, but it's also not spontaneous. It's very different from the kind of free drawing I did as a kid, when I just drew right out of my head with a pen. I didn't think about what it was going to be. I just made it, and that was so fun. So I was making an intentional effort to kind of recapture some of that experience by forcing myself to draw with a brush, which has to be, it's just, you can't premeditate it the way you do an ink drawing. It just has to happen, or it doesn't happen.
So thank you, Alison Bechdel. And thank you, all of you who have joined us today. And everyone, please remember that you can order books, in particular, The Secret to Superhuman Strength, in the link below. And please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which this year is celebrating its 16th year of presenting free literary programming. So thanks, Alison.
Yay.
It's absolutely great to see you.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.